Hey everyone and welcome to the channel. So today I'm going to talk about stewardship. So for me there's kind of three tenets of sustainable investing. It's sustainable integration, stewardship and impact. So we've spoken quite a lot about integration before, so that's about including environmental and social information into your investment decision making so that you can improve financial outcomes. Impact investing is about driving capital towards having positive environmental or social impact. But today we're going to talk about stewardship. So stewardship can take two forms. It can take the form of voting and it can take the form of engagement. So voting is a right that's afforded to shareholders. So as a shareholder, you're basically an owner in a company, and that means you have the ability to have a say on the direction of travel of the company. So you get that in the form of a vote, and you're able to exercise that vote, and you can have a say on particular issues that the company's facing. So a lot of those recently have been to do with climate change or workers' rights, for example. Another way you can conduct stewardship is through engagement. So we define engagement as two-way dialogue between two counterparties with a specific objective in mind. And that's a bit less formal, so there's no hard right to engage. But what you find is that typically in financial markets, in any kind of investment transaction, there's multiple counterparties, there's an ecosystem that surrounds that transaction, and engagement is about making sure that specific issues are addressed and risks are mitigated within those conversations. So, for example, you could be looking to transact with a particular counterparty, and you'll say, well, I'll only do this deal if these certain criteria are met. In the past, those might be financial criteria, like you have to have certain debt levels, for example. Whereas now we're seeing more and more criteria going into deals surrounding sustainability. So it might be we'll only enter this deal if you plan to have a gender split 50-50 on the board by the end of the decade, for example. Or it might be we will only invest if you set a net zero objective, for example. So that's the engagement side of things. So sustainable investors view this extremely positively. If you're a sustainable investor, you want to be investing over the long term. So it's really important that the assets that you hold are maintained and that you are proactively addressing any risks that might evolve or appear over that time frame. A particular good example I think is in property. Obviously, over time, the building kind of needs work done, it needs to be maintained. If you've got a bridge, it might need to be painted. This is all what I would call maintenance of the asset, and then it's important that if that is not being done, investors speak up and engage and vote and make sure that these assets are being looked after properly by the people who have been put in charge. An example of that within equity is potentially owning the company. An example in equity is potentially owning a energy company. And if that energy company's future is looking a bit less certain because of the global transition to net zero, then investors want to be engaging with that company and looking to influence them to change their business mix over the long term so that in a net zero world, this company could theoretically survive. So obviously sustainable investors are interested in investing over the long term. And even if they plan to sell the asset in the next 1 or 2 years, they also recognise the benefit of engaging and being a good steward of the asset in the time that they hold it. One, it's easier to sell if they ever come to decide to sell it, and then two, there's system-wide benefits of just looking after assets while you own them and then putting them back into the system. Who knows, you might buy them again in the future, or you're just, as the All Blacks would say, being a good ancestor and planting trees and improving the system as a whole that you work in, and you're not just behaving extractively. I think about stewardship a lot in my personal life, and I think you can actually apply it quite easily. So maybe when I was younger, I was always kind of treating my things quite badly, and I would kind of use and abuse them potentially. So my iPhone was always smashed. My bike was never maintained. I used to just run it into the ground. And recently I've tried to kind of be a good steward of these assets, even though I own them directly. Take care of them over the long term. And I've already seen some benefits. So obviously with your iPhone, for the first time I actually managed to trade in my old iPhone to get a new one. And I've never actually looked after my iPhone long enough to be able to sell it back at a reasonable price. So that was obviously an immediate benefit. And then bike maintenance, I've worked out that actually it costs you less money in the long run if you don't run it into the ground. You just keep it maintained regularly, get parts replaced. So I think there's just huge benefits to doing it. The problem is it takes organisation. It requires you to be proactive, and it requires you to identify the right issues. So it's a bit of a challenge. I think lots of investors get worried about the cost of stewardship, but I do think that those costs get rebated over the long term back to the investor. So obviously another way that sustainability is much better and sustainable approaches are much better than non-sustainable approaches. I also think it's important in life to exercise your votes, stand up and speak your mind, because otherwise your views and your values won't be reflected, and that's essentially how democracy works. Otherwise things could potentially in a bad scenario get used for other people's gains that don't have necessarily your best interests in mind. So I would always exercise that vote, speak your mind, and make sure that your voice is heard. So that's my introduction to stewardship. I think it's interesting how you can take concepts in investment and apply it to your own personal life. I think that's something it's really interesting to do, and I think you can test these concepts on a much smaller scale and recognise the benefits and then apply them at a bigger scale. So I hope you found that interesting. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more content. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section down below, and we'll see you in the next video.